1 year before one of the darkest moments in Point Pleasant history, people began reporting something impossible in the skies above this quiet West Virginia town. They described a towering figure with enormous wings and eyes that burned red whenever light touched them. Some witnesses believed it was simply an unknown animal. Others became convinced that its appearances meant something far more disturbing. Because while everyone was looking toward the sky, something hidden inside the Silver Bridge was already moving toward failure. Then, on December 15, 1967, the bridge suddenly collapsed into the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives, and almost immediately, an unsettling question became part of the legend. Had the mysterious creature that terrified Point Pleasant for more than a year been hunting the people who saw it? Or was Mothman never the threat at all? What if it was trying to warn them? In 1966, Point Pleasant was the kind of American town where extraordinary things were not supposed to happen. Life moved quietly. Families knew one another. People crossed the river for work, shopping, and ordinary routines. Connecting Point Pleasant with Ohio was the Silver Bridge, opened in 1928 and used every day by thousands of travelers. But several miles north of town was a very different place. Locals called it the TNT Area. The landscape was filled with abandoned roads, bunkers, concrete storage igloos, and the remains of a massive wartime industrial complex. During World War II, the West Virginia Ordnance Works had produced TNT across a site covering more than 8,000 acres. By the mid-1960s, much of it had been abandoned to nature, leaving behind an enormous maze of ruins. Wetlands and forests surrounded the old structures. Birds and wildlife had reclaimed the land. At night, however, the TNT area became something else entirely. And on November 15, 1966, 4 young people drove directly into that darkness. Roger and Linda Scarberry were traveling with their friends Steve and Mary Mallette through the abandoned area late that night. Nothing suggested that this drive would become one of the most famous cryptid encounters in American history. As their headlights swept across the old power plant, something caught their attention. At first, there were only 2 red circles in the darkness. Then the shape around them became visible. Tall, gray, roughly human in form, with enormous wings folded behind its body. All 4 witnesses were looking at it. This was not one frightened person alone in the dark. On the ground, they later described the creature as awkward, almost as if walking was not what it was built to do. Roger accelerated. Their only thought was to get back toward Point Pleasant. And then, according to their account, the impossible part began. The creature rose into the air. They said its wings barely seemed to move. It simply glided after them through the darkness. The frightened group claimed their car reached extraordinary speed on the road back toward town. Yet, every time they looked back, the figure seemed to remain with them. Only as they approached the lights of Point Pleasant did the thing finally disappear behind them. Instead of going home, the witnesses went to the authorities and told them what they had seen. Their story sounded unbelievable. But there were 4 witnesses, and they appeared genuinely shaken. Police returned with them to the area. Whatever had frightened the couples was no longer standing beside the power plant. The search found no monster, but the story was only beginning. Later accounts even described strange radio interference during visits to the area. One more detail that would become part of the growing mystery. By the next morning, the extraordinary encounter had reached a local newspaper, and suddenly, nearly everyone in Point Pleasant was talking about the mysterious creature. Some residents went looking for it themselves. Curiosity turned the abandoned complex into a nighttime destination. But searching for something in darkness is very different from unexpectedly seeing it. Soon, another frightening account emerged. A woman near the TNT area said a large gray figure rose from beside a parked vehicle. According to the story, the terrifying red eyes appeared again outside the house. Other motorists reported enormous winged shapes near roads and fields, sometimes even during daylight. Not every witness believed they had seen a supernatural creature. Some observers were convinced it was simply an unusually large bird. But reports continued appearing around Mason County, spreading the fear far beyond a single road or abandoned building. As the story grew, residents also began reporting strange telephone disturbances and unexplained sounds. Televisions and radios were said to behave strangely. Whether connected or coincidence, every new incident fed the same atmosphere. Then came reports of unusual lights in the sky. Mothman was becoming only one piece of a much larger mystery. The strange reports eventually attracted investigators from outside West Virginia. Among them was New York writer John Keel. Keel interviewed witnesses and collected stories not only about the winged figure, but about many other unexplained events. Local journalists were documenting the phenomenon as well, turning scattered sightings into a public record of a town increasingly obsessed with the unknown. The descriptions were not identical, but certain details repeated again and again. Enormous wings, unnatural movement, and those unforgettable red eyes. Keel began spending more time in the Ohio Valley, searching for a pattern behind the reports. Later accounts connected with Keel's investigation even included mysterious visitors, the now famous stories of so-called men in black. There were stories of bizarre phone calls, strange voices and warnings whose origins could never be confirmed. For Keel, the question was no longer simply, what kind of animal is Mothman? He wondered whether the sightings, strange lights, and other reports were pieces of the same phenomenon. And eventually, one of the most enduring interpretations of Mothman began to take shape. Perhaps the creature was not attacking people. Perhaps appearing before them was the message. But if Mothman was a warning, no one yet knew what they were being warned about. Weeks became months. The calendar moved through 1967, but the strange year in Point Pleasant was not over. Every day, cars and trucks continued crossing the Silver Bridge just as they had for decades. Its suspension system depended on massive steel eye-bars linked together in chains. Deep inside one of those critical components, however, a flaw was developing where ordinary visual inspection could not reveal it. By December, Point Pleasant was preparing for Christmas. For most residents, life continued normally. Yet, in the legend told later, the image of the red-eyed figure remained hanging over the town like an unanswered question. Friday, December 15, 1967, began like an ordinary winter day. At around 5 in the evening, the bridge was crowded with rush hour and holiday traffic. Dozens of vehicles were on the bridge. None of the people inside them could see the tiny weakness hidden in the steel above. After nearly 40 years of stress, corrosion, and fatigue, that hidden defect had reached a critical point. Then, one critical eye-bar fractured. The chain separated. In a structure with almost no redundancy, the failure began to spread. Drivers had almost no time to understand what was happening. The roadway moved beneath them. Within roughly a minute, the center span, side spans, and towers collapsed toward the river. An ordinary Friday evening had transformed into a catastrophe. Sirens filled Point Pleasant. Rescue crews, police, and local residents rushed toward the river. When morning came, the bridge that had defined the town's riverfront was gone. 46 people lost their lives in the Silver Bridge disaster. The tragedy permanently changed Point Pleasant. The official investigation did not find anything supernatural. Engineers found a physical cause hidden inside the bridge. A critical flaw had developed through stress corrosion and corrosion fatigue until one eye-bar could no longer carry its load. But something strange happened to the Mothman story. After the bridge disaster, reports around Point Pleasant sharply faded from the center of public attention. Skeptics have suggested large birds, including owls and even a stray sandhill crane, as possible explanations for at least some of the sightings. Today, Point Pleasant has embraced the legend. Mothman became a symbol of the town and one of America's most famous cryptids. Maybe Mothman was a bird. Maybe fear transformed ordinary sightings into something extraordinary. Or maybe the people of Point Pleasant saw something we still don't understand. But one question remains. If Mothman really was an omen, was anyone ever supposed to understand the warning in time? What do you think Mothman really was? An unknown creature, a misidentified animal, or a warning of something terrible to come? Tell me your theory in the comments.